Rehab, and you. Welcome to Wrestling with Recovery, not another wrestling podcast. No, seriously, it's not. We use a lot of terms and definitions from pro wrestling, and I'm not gonna lie, there's some performers that have influenced me in my recovery, and so hopefully I can share that journey here. But as far as, did you see what Wrestler X did to Wrestler? No, we're not talking about that this week. By the way, I do want to give a shout out. I got to give a shout out to my crew over at the One True Sports. Paul Bromwell, Dom, and Marcus D'Angelo and their crew, Andrew Hermes, they've all done a wonderful job launching that platform earlier this week. So if you're looking for a wrestling podcast, I would definitely go suggest check out One True Sport. They just launched here on the YouTube platform, and they've got a lot of big things planned. I promise you that, and wish them nothing but luck, because they have been nothing but supportive in me with this journey. So that being said, this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal medical advice. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. This podcast is not intended to replace professional medical or legal advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host or management. If you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts or a crisis, please reach out immediately to the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255 or text HOME, HOME, to the crisis text line at 741-741. These services are free and confidential. And for the international viewers and listeners, you can check out the comment section, the episode description down below. If you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening, check out where you are streaming on the platform, and there you'll find the link to the international suicide hotlines. So grateful to be back here after a month. Life got lifey. Had a work trip. Kids had recital. We had 2 swim meets, post-grad studies, work. It just all got to keep me busy. So had to put this on the back burner for a week. And in fact, you're going to notice here on this episode, we are going to trim down a little bit with the What Are You segment and the count, the 3 count. They'll still be here, but won't be as consistent as we had seen them in the previous week's episodes. But grateful to have everyone here. Grateful to be producing this podcast here today, because this is such a critical point in my journey that I'm happy and ecstatic to share. And I hope that it helps someone out there. So, real quick, recapping last episode that we had, the Matthew Perry episode, a lot of positive feedback. I was truly surprised. I was kind of leery on it, but I knew it needed to be spoken about, and a lot of positive feedback. And again, cannot recommend his autobiography enough. As far as the recovery community goes, we definitely lost a very talented individual, someone that had a strong voice in it. And so hopefully we can help carry that message. Highly recommend the autobiography. If you haven't checked it out yet, whether audiobook or hard copy or paperback, it is available wherever you purchase your books. So, yeah. And one of Matthew Perry's strong points in his journey was rehab, and we're going to talk about rehab today. So if you are just now jumping in here on the series, you can tell by looking at the episodes that we have laid out in the archives that we've laid out the definitions that I use here, and especially definitions for addiction, recovery, what relapse is and isn't, lapses, laid all that down there. So while the first part of the series got very technical with those episodes, now we're going to pivot, and this is where we're going to start seeing more stories being shown. I'm going to share my journey. I'll be upfront. I'm not going to share every single bit of detail because I'm in the belief that not everyone is privileged to hear the exact details, but hopefully you get the gist of what I'm trying to get out there. and find commonality in the threads and themes of those that have also been struggling with addiction and trying to get into recovery. So if you are new, highly recommend you check out the vault, especially whenever I use the terms addiction, um, sobriety, recovery, relapse, lapses. um, got long episodes on those already in the archives. But for today, we're going to talk about rehab. The episode prior to Matthew Perry's, called "This Is It," essentially showcased the time that I knew it was time to go to rehab. And so, if you haven't listened to that yet, I encourage you to go back, listen to that first, and then don't worry, we'll still be here. You can catch in on today's episode. But I think with rehab, everyone has heard or has a general understanding of the idea of rehab, right? Um, whenever someone you hear about it in the Hollywood tabloids, so and so went to rehab, and it's like, oh no. Um, I think there's a lot that is correct and being understood about rehab, but there's also a lot of confusion about what is and isn't rehab. Um, and because there is a lot of medical terms and medical that goes into rehab, I want to be careful to not get too overly descriptive. Um, if that ruffles some feathers, I apologize. But again, I'm not here to give medical advice. I am nowhere qualified for that. What I am going to do here is share my journey in trying to get to rehab, and think of this episode truly as, if I could go back in time to a year ago, February of 2023, when I went into rehab. If I could hop in a time machine and go back, this is what I would tell myself then. So whether you're just curious about rehab, you're actively exploring what rehab looks like for yourself or others, that's what you can expect out of this episode. So let's go ahead and take a trip back. February 2023. I mentioned it in the "This Is It" episode. I came to a point where I knew it was time. I had an incident happen, and the next morning I wasn't feeling all that good. With me, and the way that I was in substance use, I was shaking. And I say substance, but I mean, it's, again, alcohol was my substance of choice. It wasn't like I was hooked on all this other stuff. That's the other thing too, is I'm kind of giving it my view as someone who was in substance use disorder. So, but I think you can see commonalities, whether it's with alcohol or substance. Those two can be quite interchangeable. The withdrawal effects may be different, but for the most part, they're in the same. So now that I've cleared that up, so the next day I was laying in bed, and I'd done this multiple times over. I had the shakes, I had the sweats. I called it anxiety because I was hungover and I was really anxious. And I was sitting there because I knew I'd messed up, and I knew that things were getting out of control. And with all of that, I decided, maybe it was time to call the SAMHSA hotline. Um, and what made me want to go back and go ahead and call was a story that I had heard from a pro wrestler that I really, I enjoy hearing him speak. I really do. I think he has wonderful stories. He is a great storyteller. I grew up in the 90s watching him. To me, I'll be honest, he is the definition of masculinity. Like, he's just, as someone who struggles with the idea of masculinity, like, that's like, if I had to define a physical sense of masculinity, it is Kevin Nash. The dude is just, I don't know how else. He just has that demeanor about him. He has that swag about him, and it's undeniable. But earlier, probably within 6 months ago of that time, he had lost his son. His son had struggled with alcohol, and I don't want to put words in his mouth. I'm just going to say, go out and go listen to his Click This podcast. He does a wonderful job of retelling that story. It is tough. Um, he is very raw. He is very vulnerable. He is very authentic. And And I'm grateful that he had the podcast to share his story and journey. Because grief is very much a part of mine, and grief's a bitch. Don't know if you know this or not, but grief is tough. And so after hearing his journey and the way that he was trying to help his son, I decided I should call the hotline to see if maybe I needed to go to the hospital. Because, like I said, I'd done this time and time again. I had gone into um, a night of heavy drinking and then, okay, just got to pound some Gatorade, got to do this, got to do that, and I'll be fine. And so I remember calling the line, and the guy was like, yeah, you probably should just to be safe. I was like, okay, well, it's just alcohol. So it's not like it's heroin. And I got to the ER and, of course, did the check in. Ended up staying 24 hours. They wanted to keep me longer, but I was like, nah. Like in the back of my mind, all I'm hearing is cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Nope, can't pay that. Um, Thankfully, it didn't go against AM. You'll hear this AMA against medical advice. Didn't go against the AMA, but I wasn't answering my phone. People were a little concerned, and I wish I would have said, "Hey, I'm okay. Don't worry." Um, but I remember just sitting in the ER, and I had everything hooked up, and hearing all the beeps and whatnot. And that was the time that I realized it was time for me to go to rehab. And I called one of my closest friends, Mike, and told him what I was doing. And he goes, I think you're right. I think it's time. And um, I'll say this, I wasn't court ordered. I didn't even know what the legal ramifications would be if I went, because I'm a single dad. Like, what am I going to do with my kids? I had a dog at the time. What am I going to do with poor Roscoe? Can't just abandon him. And things worked out. And so the next day after I got released out of the hospital, um, my mom did come up and sit with me and I'll say this because I've heard, and I just want to be public with this too. I'd heard that people had blamed her for my alcoholism, which to those people, I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it. I'll say you're wrong. To blame anyone else, to sit there and say, well, they're an alcoholic, they're a druggie because of you, that's bullshit and lazy. And two, completely wrong, because unless that person is just flat out forcing that person to drink, then yeah, that felt a little bit cathartic. Yeah. Anyways, again, the judginess, not a fan of that, and I say that as a judgy person. Anyways, she came up and said, hey, what's going on? And I said, here's what I'm gonna do. And she said, okay, I think you're on the right path. I support you. um and Here's the thing about rehab, as I'm now 12 minutes into the episode and I'm just now talking about it, so apologize. Rehab is fucking exhausting, just researching it. And I say this because there is so much out there. Like, you try to search rehab facilities near me. I had zero idea where to start. I was trying to figure out where to start, and you're getting hit up like, rehab now, rehab here, we come get you. Like, it was so overwhelming to the point where I almost it was like, I don't want to go to rehab. Forget the fact that I got to worry about my house and finances and job and da 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 da. I didn't want to go because I didn't know what to expect. Um, I'm not going to overtly say it, although I really want to, because I don't have the backing information of it. I will say the first thing when it comes to looking for a rehab facility, do your research, really vet the place. This isn't for every place, but this is just my experience with it. This is not medical advice. This is not all that other junk. This is just my experience with it. Vet the place you're going to. Make sure if you have insurance, they take that insurance. Like, oh yeah. Their goal is to get you there, which the pro is, as someone that's if you're in substance abuse or substance use disorder, you really don't want to go because you're having to admit that you have a problem, and that is tough. And so it is tough because like, come on, we'll just get you out here, and you'll feel that rushness. I felt that rushness. And I really wanted to vet. There was a couple of places that I looked at that, looking back on it now, I'm glad I didn't go to. So for me, I really vetted the place in the short amount of time that I could, because it was like I knew I needed to go. And I had a place picked out. Um, they wanted, there are some places they wanted all the money up front, which I get. Um, they want to make sure they get their money before you skimp out. Um, Chances are, you say, okay, yep, I'll be there. And then they do all the work to get your room ready for you, and they put their time and resources and efforts into it. And then, oh, hey, you don't show up. There is a balance to that. So I understand it. Um, but some places they wanted their money all up front. Others said, hey, just put this much down. We can work with you the rest of the way. Others were, nope, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out later. Just, we need to get you here. We need to get you taken care of. Um, so my first piece of advice when it comes to rehab searching is to make sure that you really vet the place. Check the Google reviews, check the website, check to make sure. I mean, if you have time, definitely take the time to research it. Again, I say that cautiously because as an alcoholic addict, someone that's in active addiction, rationalize, justify, minimize. You can talk yourself out of rehab. I don't really need to go that bad. But definitely it's worth vetting. The second thing about rehab that I'm glad that I did. One, I'm glad that I vetted the place that I went to, because it ended up being a great facility, and they have been wonderful to me post rehab. Um, the second thing that I am really glad that I did was that I left. I left the area. I was really looking like, okay, yeah, I'll go to rehab. I'll go 2 hours up, and that way I got my car, and like I'm trying to think, okay, how do I not be a burden to anyone else? And um and the facility, one of the things that was told to me was, actually that's not a good idea. I'm like, okay, why? It's because if you drive yourself up and after you hit a certain time, you're more likely to drive yourself back home. You're more likely to check yourself out against medical advice, AMA. So I'm really grateful that the place that I went to, I ended up flying to Florida. So I did the thing. I went to Florida to go to rehab. Does that make me an addict yet? But I was really grateful. My mom did drive me down to the airport, and she dropped me off. She saw me off. She hugged me and said, "I support you. You got this, and I'll see you when you get back." And she was there for me. Um, so here's the other part about rehab. So did the research. I literally flew out. Again, and that part of it, the financial, medical, all that side is so different. This is so now that I told you about how I got to it, now that I've rambled for close to 18 minutes, here's as far as the rehab part it goes. And I think this is the part, whether you're going into rehab, considering going to rehab, or have a loved one that probably needs to go to rehab. I'm going to throw out a lot of terms here, and it's going to get a little confusing, but I wish I would have known them before going into it. One, rehab is not detox, and detox is not rehab. So be on the lookout for that. Whenever you're researching a facility, the place that I went to, they offered detox on top of rehab. So essentially, with detoxing, and I call this pre-rehab. That's not a technical term, but for here, pre-rehab, there's a detox facility. Now, detox you could go to the hospital and do. There are probably, especially depending on what you're withdrawing from, areas that really specialize in that. With detox, you are under supervised medical care. The dangers of unsupervised detox, so where hangovers become a little bit more severe, much more intense. Unsupervised detox can cause severe nausea, seizures, hallucinations, coma, or even death. So if you are someone in very hard active addiction and you're trying to detox on your own, be aware that those are the dangers. And I think that's where alcohol, in my experience, was dangerous. And that's like, oh, this is just a hangover. Oh, it's just a hangover. No, you're withdrawing. Your body is literally withdrawing from alcohol, the drug. And again, you can go back into the archives to listen how we establish how alcohol is a drug. So in the detox sense, you're going to be looked at very closely, monitored. And then the rehab part, now it's called inpatient treatment. With rehab, you're removed from work, you're removed from school, you're removed from home life. I'll be honest, rehab was really, really tough in that sense. As my phone's going off, this is probably a sign. I forgot to mute it. I apologize. We got 2 minutes left. With rehab, the toughest part was being completely removed. And I think for me, it was, looking back on it now, it's one of the areas that I've had probably the greatest shining lights for me, is because what bothered me most about being separated from work, from school, from home life, from being a dad, I didn't like myself. I really was uncomfortable with myself. I was really uncomfortable with sitting by myself. I didn't know how to not be a coworker, or not be a father, or all the other things that I kept myself busy with. And so there was that rush, like, I got to get back. I got to get back. I got to get back. The pro to rehab is that you get the time to focus in on yourself, and really start to try to recover. Now, rehab typically 30 to 40 day stay. I think mine was close to 37 days. Sometimes you'll see where, if you have a facility that doubles as a detox rehab, it's like, oh, they were in rehab for 45 days. Well, no, you were detoxing for 7 to 10. And then after, on day 11, you actually started the rehab process. So that's something to, as you're researching a rehab facility, see, is it strictly just rehab, where they just kind of monitor you post detox, and try to teach you a thing or three about living um, in abstinence or in recovery. Those are the things you should be looking out for. Now, I will say, for me, like I said, I was very lucky. I saw a lot of things in rehab that are going to stick with me forever. One, fentanyl. I saw fentanyl withdrawal for the first time. I'm not going to lie, that scared the hell out of me. Seeing people come off of fentanyl um, was really eye opening, and really underscores how big of a problem that is. Two, I was very fortunate, with the rehab facility I went to. We had a roommate, and I'll have to talk about my rehab stay in and of itself, because that was a whole journey. That was wild. But I had a roommate. I think I had like 2 or 3 different roommates, and just because the way that we ended up lining up, and I was very fortunate. My roommates they were fathers themselves. They were they took care of themselves. They took pride in themselves. They weren't like trying to steal stuff or trying to cause havoc, or they were, still weren't having heavy withdrawals themselves. So I was very fortunate in that sense. Um, and then, probably, with the rehab I went to, the biggest thing is that I relearned how important structure is for me. At the time, I was just kind of I was in survival mode. There's no other way to put it other than I was in survival mode. And once I took that break from life and got a chance to stop and really look at it, I realized how long I had been in survival mode and how bad it was no longer serving me. And with that, um, I remember sitting there. Since I had a lot of time on my hand, I decided, you know what? Once I get out of here, here's my structured living. Here's what I'm going to start doing. Inside of rehab, they did, they taught a lot of medical things. some spirituality side, physical health, making sure that you're getting the right nutrients, getting your body back in, getting some good vitamins back in you. It was a really good experience that I had with rehab, but I was definitely ready. Now, here's the other part as we're coming up on 5 minutes left in the program. Post rehab. So I call it post rehab, even though it's not the technical side. Once you get close to your end day of rehab, typically it is a 30-40 day stay in rehab. Sometimes it's not unheard of that a rehab goes 90 days. Okay. Regardless, once you get out of or ready to transition out of rehab and slowly reintroduce back into your life, you're going to hear these terms. And I remember hearing about them, like, what the hell are these? PHP, IOP, and OP. Yeah. You down with PHP? Yeah, you know me. No, actually, I wasn't. PHP is partial hospitalization program, where it's like a step, like a baby step back into getting you back into home life or back into society. You're still doing the classwork, you're still being monitored, but you get a little bit more freedom. Whereas rehab, you're confined to those four walls. My buddy Jonathan and I, we walked around. Gosh, the most physical exercise. Like anytime they're like, okay, we're gonna go walk for an hour outside. I'm like, yes. I start like take my freedom. I would realize how much I was taking my freedom for granted. With PHP, you get a little bit more responsibility back. Try to earn back some of that trust. Show that you're stabling out. IOP is intensive outpatient program. Again, another step down. In my case, as soon as I got out of rehab, about within 45 days, I relapsed, if not sooner. And so I went into IOP. I didn't go back to rehab. I just went back to IOP, where I began really starting working on the internal stuff. And there I did it. It was 3 hours. I think it was either every night or every other night. It was something crazy. But it was 3 to 4 hours grueling work, where we worked in group settings and we worked in one-on-ones. And then there's OP, outpatient program, which is probably more like a therapy session. It's not nearly as intense. It's like an hour a week, if not maybe 3 hours a week. Something, again, all these vary. These are just my experiences with it. Things that I wish I would have known looking backward. So here in the episode, talked about detox, a detox center. Okay, if you have been in heavy use for a very long time, probably strongly need to consider a detox center, and look into that. If you're looking to go to rehab, see if they do offer detox. That way, you're not having to move around a lot. Probably eases up on the copay with insurance if you have it. There are facilities that offer both detox and rehab to keep it there. And then post rehab, once trying to get acclimated back into society, PHP, IOP, OP. Those are the three things you need to look into and consider part of your recovery journey. Some people are able to do it without. Some people need to. It's your journey. At the end of the day, what matters is your journey. I will say this as we wrap up today's episode. What I find funny is as I was researching these rehab places, and before I settled in on the place that I went to, I was calling all these places, and of course, they're doing the sales pitch. Oh yeah, we'll get you out here, da 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 da. And once I found my place, they took my phone away. Couldn't talk to anyone because I was really trying to focus in on myself. So about a month later, after I get out, I talked to this facility that I had talked to, and I told them, "Hey, yeah, I found a place. I'm good. I'm working on it." And they go, "Okay, well, we'll stay in contact with you in case you need to come back." I'm like, "Okay." And I'll never forget, I get a call probably 30 days later after that from this other facility, and I go, "Hello," and they go, "So, have you relapsed yet?" I was like, "What the hell? What kind of welcoming call is this?" So yeah, it is a journey. Do your research. I hope this helps, and a little bit of some of the differences that your journey will more than likely take. So that is it for this week's episode. As always, like, comment, share, follow on YouTube, Wrestling with Recovery Pod. You can also find it on socials, Facebook, X, Instagram, all of that. Wrestling with Recovery Pod. Until next week, I am Zol, and take care of yourself. Bye.